Well, my first guest on the program today from Labor, Tim Watts and James Paterson from the Liberal Party. Thanks both for your time.
Pleasure, Tom.
Why don't we start on the Nats? What did you make of yesterday, James Paterson?
Well, I want to shamelessly steal a line from Josh Frydenberg, which is that Liberals commenting on National Party leadership is like rabbis participating in choosing the next Pope. I think that's quite right. I respect their sovereign right as their independent political party to do as they wish in the Westminster system to decide their own leadership, and they've done that.
There must be some frustration, in particular as well on the day they did it, doing it on that particular day. I mean, you don't have to, surely.
We've talked before on your program, Tom, about how democracy is a bit messy sometimes, but that is the Westminster system. If we wanted a different political system, we could have a big referendum, change our constitution, have a presidential system where you can't remove a leader by a party vote in the middle of a term. But we don't have that system. We have a Westminster system, and political leaders have to command the support of their own parties for the duration of the term to remain in their position.
You must be hoping when Barnaby Joyce said this is it, and he's supporting the re-election of a Morrison-McCormack government, that he is true to his word?
Yeah, I take him at his word.
And you'd be hoping that's the case?
I think so.
Tim Watts, Labor's pursuit of this, of course, centres more around Bridget McKenzie. The Phil Gations report has come out and Labor's essentially casting doubt on it. Do you have confidence in him to stay on in his role as head of PM&C?
Well, look, Tom, we've in the past raised questions about Mr Gaetjens' role, and I think his judgment of accepting that role as a former staffer of the Prime Minister, it's very difficult to have confidence in the independence of Mr Gaetjens in undertaking reviews of this kind when he previously worked in an overtly political role for Scott Morrison. Our view is pretty clear on this, that this sports rort scandal does not stop at Bridget McKenzie. This is a government that rorts from the head down. It's very clear that the Prime Minister and campaign officials from the Liberal Party were involved in the direction of these funds. And, this has an impact on communities like mine. I mean, there's a women's footy club in my electorate. Hundreds of girls and women play at this club. I found out last night their application for a grant for women's change facilities, so they didn't have to change behind the bushes, was rated 74 out of 100. 94 projects with a lower rank were funded by the government under the first round of this project alone. What does the Prime Minister say to them about the merit of this project?
When you say we know about involvement, for example, from the Prime Minister's office, what do we know for a fact there?
Well, we have documentary evidence from Peter Van Onselen, emails going backwards and forwards with the Minister's office talking about which grants were appropriate and which weren't. Well, last election campaign, let's be frank, we all saw it. This was a one-man show from Scott Morrison the last election. He was running around the country, he was presenting these grants. The idea that he was not involved with this intimately as a former state party director of the Liberal Party is utterly fanciful. So we've got a Senate inquiry and we'll get to the bottom of this.
All right, we'll see what happens in the Senate inquiry. Can you just be explicit, though, with Phil Gations? Are you saying he should go?
Well, at the time of his appointment, we made statements saying that we didn't think that that was an appropriate thing for Mr Gaetjens to accept. I think that subsequent events have highlighted the concerns, the reasons for the concerns that we raised at that time.
But is that clear-cut? You think he should go?
I find it very difficult to have confidence in the independence of Mr Gaetjens.
Do you have confidence or not? You say
I said that. I mean, look.
You're saying, but I just want to get this explicit. You don't seem to be quite saying that he should go, or that you don't have confidence. You say you find it very difficult.
If I was Mr Gaetjens and I cared about the standards inside the public service, the standards of integrity, the public service standards that all public servants are required to adhere to, I would not be in the role that he is in at the moment.
What do you make of that, James Paterson?
Tom, Phil Gaetjens is a highly respected public servant who, yes, has spent time also working in political offices, but he is not alone in doing that. Labor, when they were in office, appointed a number of their former political staff to very senior positions in the public service, including secretaries of departments. In fact, the current Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs, who serves this coalition government, is himself a former Labor staffer. I actually think our public service gains a lot from spending some time working in political offices, whether that's Liberal offices or Labor offices or National Party offices. And I'm surprised to see the Labor Party going down this route, given their own track record in this area.
Given the politics of this review, the ANAO said it was biased, this program. It did target marginal seats. According to Scott Morrison, the Gaetjens review didn't, but we're not seeing it. Don't we need to see the report released?
Well, the government's taken the ANA report very seriously, and we will be acting on the recommendations of the ANA report, and the ANA has a really important role in our parliamentary system. I'm a big believer in that kind of independent audit of the way we spend public money, so we should take it very seriously. But having said that, they are not the last word on everything, and in particular when it comes to the handing out of grants. I think there is a role for ministers, elected public officials, for helping determine how that money is spent.
That can still be true, and you can still release the report. Why not release the report? This is then the last word on the matter. The PM's now saying, in contradiction to the Auditor General's report, no, there wasn't targeting of marginal seats. Take my word for it.
Well, Tom, as you know, this is a report it's a document of Cabinet. It's a report that was handed to a Cabinet subcommittee. The ordinary course of events is that those things
But it can be released.
Yeah, of course they can, but the ordinary process, the ordinary precedent here is not to release them publicly.
But it's not an ordinary type document, isn't it? It's a review that contradicts another review that is public.
And Tom, you're entitled to make the judgments that you clearly already have on this based on that. That's well within your rights, but the government accepts the recommendations of the Gaetjens report.
Veterans suicide today, an announcement by the government, not actually a Royal Commission, but the powers of one, both looking back but also looking forward as well, and advocacy as well, a pretty detailed announcement. Labor was calling for a Royal Commission. Do you welcome what has been announced?
Yeah, Tom, we want to be bipartisan about this. This is a very serious issue, and an issue that's been building in salience in the community for quite some time. As you say, we were calling for a Royal Commission to really look at this issue in depth, and that had been backed by mothers of veterans who had committed suicide, campaigners like Julianne Finney. This has been building for 6 months. Look, we welcome the announcement today. It's not a Royal Commission, has many of the powers of the Royal Commission. We're trying to be constructive and bipartisan on this, so I think it's a pretty good thing.
So the government was resisting a Royal Commission, but it seems to have all the powers of it anyway. What have you made of the detail we've seen?
Tom, the Prime Minister said late last year that he would reflect carefully on this over the summer, and despite the busy summer that he has, he's done that. And I think what he and Darren Chester as Minister have come up with is frankly much better than a Royal Commission. One of the frustrations the public has with Royal Commissions and all reports to government is that they do good work, they produce a report, but then what happens? What's the follow-through? What's the follow-up? What's the implementation? And I think effectively what we've got here is a permanent Royal Commission or a rolling Royal Commission. And that means it's going to be there, able to provide advice and input to government on an ongoing basis, but with all the powers that it needs to gather that evidence. I think that is a really good permanent addition to our architecture in dealing with veteran mental health. I
think a lot would welcome the independent commissioner too, so that they can continue to get that advice. So as I said, we're talking to the Minister later on in the program. The climate wars appeared to break out in the party room yesterday. Do you agree with Andrew Laming that the coalition broadly needs to stop talking about whether man-made climate change is happening or not?
I'm very reticent, Tom, to go into the ins and outs of coalition party room discussions, but in this instance, because it's been well canvassed in the media, I'm very happy to say it was not as exciting as it has been presented in the media today. Sometimes I think the public, if ever they're able to sit in on a party room meeting, would be thoroughly bored and disappointed with what they heard. Yes, there was a discussion about climate change. Yes, let's be adult and let's be honest about this. There are a range of different perspectives within our party, as there are in other parties, on this issue, but it was a good, respectful conversation, and I think what we heard was people speaking up from the different perspectives of their constituents, because someone in far north Queensland or central Queensland who works in a coal mine does have a different perspective on climate change to someone who lives in inner city,
and we've got to
bridge
those. Are you talking about whether it's happening or not, whether man-made climate change
I'm talking more about...
There is a view within your party that some believe it's not happening or they're sceptical about it. That doesn't exist within Greens or Labor, does it?
Well, I don't know, Tom. I haven't listened to them or talked to them about it. But what I'm really more talking about is the different perspectives on the policy responses to climate change.
I understand that, and that debate's a completely valid one. But the denying of the accepted science is another matter, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I really think to the extent that anyone holds that view, it's a very minority, small point of view, and it doesn't dictate or influence government policy.
There are a few loud voices, though, aren't they?
Well, if they are, I'm not sure I agree. I think that's a fair characterisation. But if they are, I think they're very minor in the scheme of things.
When we talk about this debate and what's unhelpful, what did you make of Adam Bandt? One of his first acts as leader was to talk about big business making its money by killing people.
Oh, Tom. I have to say that, congratulations, Adam Bandt, becoming leader of the Greens. It's a great responsibility and an honour to be a leader of a political party in Australia. It's fair to say, though, that there's a reason that I'm a member of the Labor Party and not the Greens. We have fundamental philosophical differences about the way to go about making change in society. And I think that the Greens model of change, this sort of hectoring, lecturing, sometimes abusive model of public advocacy, it just doesn't work in the Australian community. There's a reason why the Greens' support is at the level it is, and it is not growing. You know, in the Labor Party, we're about building a majority coalition of support for action on climate, because that's what it will take to respond to this issue. We need an enduring majority of Australians demanding action over the long term to respond to this challenge. I just don't think you can build that by dividing the Australian public, by insulting and abusing people.
The coalition you're talking about, does it necessarily mean perhaps not being as ambitious as some in your party want as well? It's not, not everyone has the same opinion on how much to act in Labor, that's fair to say.
Yeah, I mean, the history of the Labor movement is that we build coalitions by compromise, by internal discussion, by building coalitions around a broad objective down the track. Of course that means compromise. It particularly means compromise in a country like Australia, where, as James is very correct to say, there are different opinions about the way to respond to this issue in my inner city Melbourne electorate versus central and northern Queensland.
All right.
Building a compromise position on that is the job of a governing party.
Briefly on Adam Bandt, I mean, I suppose you can point to things such as air pollution, which does kill Australians each year, and you can draw a direct link.
No one was happier, other than Adam Bandt, at his election as Greens leader than the Liberal Party this week, Tom. For all Richard Di Natale's faults, he is the soft, cuddly version of the Greens, and Adam Bandt is the hard-edged, left-wing version of the Greens, and I don't think it's going to go down very well in the community, and it's particularly not going to go down in those areas where the Greens were making some gains, in those kind of leafy suburbs of our big cities. I don't think it's going to work.
James Paterson, Tim Watts, thanks for your time.